I stepped into the command center, the fluorescent lights buzzing like distant artillery. Bandages wrapped tight around my ribs, still raw from the shrapnel that tore through the site the day her unit struck. The major stood at the table, maps spread out like wounds on the wood. She didn't look up at first, just pointed to the blueprints of the city I'd been rebuilding, the one she'd leveled in a single night. "Assess the damage," she said, voice flat as rifle reports. I froze. The lives under those ruins weren't lines on paper. I wouldn't count them for her until she named them. Our eyes locked then, hers dark and unyielding, mine burning with the dust of what was lost. She stepped closer, the air between us sharpening. The others in the room shifted, then filed out without a word, leaving us alone with the scattered plans and the weight of what she'd done. She didn't back away. Instead, she leaned over the table, her finger tracing a collapsed bridge on the map, the one I'd designed to carry families across the river. "You're the architect. Tell me how to fix it." Her tone carried that command edge, the kind drilled into soldiers, but I heard the crack beneath it. My side throbbed, a reminder of the blast that had thrown me clear but buried my crew. I pressed my hand to the bandage, feeling the heat seep through. "Fix it? You mean rebuild what your orders erased?" The words hung there, sharp. She straightened, uniform crisp despite the grit clinging to her sleeves, and met my gaze again. Dust motes danced in the light between us, settling on her collar like forgotten ash. I turned toward the door, but she blocked it without moving, just her presence filling the space. "You're staying, assigned to my unit for the rebuild oversight." Her words landed like a directive, no room for debate. I laughed, short and bitter, the pain flaring in my ribs. "Proximity like this? Working under you? After what happened?" She didn't flinch. "Your expertise is needed. This isn't atonement, it's necessity. The city won't stand without you." I searched her face for remorse, but it was all angles and control, jaw set like she was briefing troops. Yet something flickered in her eyes, a shadow I couldn't place. She reached for a stack of maps on the table, handing them over. Her hand brushed my arm, rough from calluses, warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. I pulled back, the contact lingering like a spark on dry tinder. Heat rose in my chest, mixing with the ache. "Don't," I said, voice low. She held the map steady. "Take them. You'll need to know the perimeters." The fluorescent hum overhead pulsed with my wound, each throb sinking to the tension coiling in the room. Dust from her uniform shifted as she moved, carrying the faint scent of cordite and earth. We stood there, the silence stretching. Then she rolled up her sleeve, just enough to show a scar snaking across her forearm, jagged, like shrapnel's bite, from the same operation that had marked me. "It mirrors yours," she said, not looking away. "We both carry it." The revelation hit quiet, her skin pale under the lights, the mark a twin to my hidden one. I swallowed, the air feeling thicker. She wasn't boasting. It was raw, like she'd peeled back armor for a second. Night fell outside the tent walls, the base quieting to murmurs and distant generators. She nodded toward the door. "I'll escort you to quarters." We walked in step, her boots steady beside my uneven gait. The path was rough, gravel crunching underfoot, and the darkness pressed in. Each breath felt measured, the space between us narrowing with every step. Her shoulder brushed mine once, accidental, but the warmth stayed. By the time we reached the tent flap, the air had thickened, charged with what neither of us named. She stopped, hand on the canvas. "Rest. We start at dawn." I nodded, slipping inside, but the echo of her touch followed me into the dark. Dawn came too soon, the canvas tent walls glowing pale under the rising light. My quarters were makeshift, a cot squeezed next to a folding table, but the real surprise waited outside, our shared setup. "Efficiency," she said when I emerged, her voice cutting the morning chill. The main tent held her command post and my workspace, divided only by a low partition of crates. No privacy, just the hum of the base filtering through. I set up my sketches, pencils scratching lines for new foundations, while she pored over tactics maps across the divide. Her presence was constant, boots pacing, chair scraping as she shifted. The air carried her scent, metal and sweat, mixing with the canvas dampness. Days blurred into routine, forced into each other's orbit. I'd lean over blueprints, erasing old designs swallowed by rubble, and feel her eyes on me. One afternoon, the wound pulled tight under my shirt, sweat soaking the bandage. I winced, hand pressing it down. She noticed immediately, crossing the space in 2 strides. "Let me see." Before I could protest, her hands were there, rough but sure, lifting the hem of my shirt. She adjusted the dressing, fingers grazing the edges of the scar, calluses dragging slow across heated skin. The touch was practical, almost clinical, but it lingered, a beat too long on the inflamed line, her breath steady against my side. I held still, pulse thudding under her palm. "It needs air," she murmured, finally stepping back. But the warmth stayed, coiling low. "You think war doesn't leave marks?" she asked later that evening, her voice low as she cleaned her rifle at the table. The question hung, aimed at the scar she'd touched, but deeper. I set my pencil down, the blueprint half finished, a hospital wing rising from debris. Marks on stone, maybe. But the lives it erased? Those don't fade. My words came sharp, the faces of my crew flashing, gone in the blast she'd ordered. She paused, cloth still on the barrel, her jaw tightening. "I know what it costs." But she didn't elaborate, just resumed the motion, the click of metal echoing. The partition felt thinner, the space between us charged, like static before a strike. I caught her watching then, my hands moving over paper, tracing arches and beams that might hold against future storms. Her gaze was unflinching, fixed on the curve of my fingers, the way they pressed graphite into lines. She didn't look away when our eyes met, just held it, dark and steady, until I broke first, heat rising in my face. The tent felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken weight. We worked in that silence, my sketches growing bolder, her maps marked with red for risks. But the proximity wore, every brush of elbow or shared glance pulling tighter. Then the supply delay hit, a convoy stalled by washed-out roads, stranding us with rations and no reinforcements for days. The base quieted, generators sputtering low. Conversation turned personal one night, firelight flickering through the flap. "Lost 3 in my last op," she said suddenly, staring at the flames. "Good ones. Faces I still see." Her voice cracked, just once, vulnerability slipping through the command. I nodded, the wound in my side a dull echo. "My crew? 2 buried, 1 still missing. They trusted the plans." We sat closer than before, knees almost touching, sharing the heat. Her hand rested on her knee, inches from mine, the confession hanging like smoke. The storm rolled in that midnight, wind howling against the canvas, rain lashing like shrapnel. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the crates. I bolted upright on the cot, ribs protesting. She was there already, crossing to my side, her silhouette sharp in the dim lantern glow. "Stay low," she said, pulling a blanket over us both as the tent shuddered. We huddled, shoulders pressed, her arm steady around my back to brace against the gusts. Thunder masked our breaths, quick and synced, her warmth seeping through damp clothes. The world narrowed to that space, her grip firm, breaths mingling in the dark. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face, close, unguarded. The storm raged on, but inside, something shifted, pulling us nearer in the chaos. The storm cleared by morning, leaving mud-slick paths and a sky scrubbed raw. She insisted we go out then, to the ruins at the city's edge. "You need to see it firsthand," she said, her voice steady over breakfast rations, eyes on her coffee tin. No choice in it, her assignment meant I followed, boots sinking into the wet earth as we trudged toward the skeletal remains of what I'd planned. The air hung heavy with damp stone and charred wood, the river murmuring low nearby. I pointed to the first failure, a toppled support column, twisted metal blooming from concrete like broken ribs. "Your strike hit here," I said, tracing the fracture with my finger. The vibration sheared the foundations. That hospital wing? Gone in seconds. She nodded, face unreadable. But her boots shifted in the muck, closer to the edge. Debris cluttered the ground, shards of rebar, chunks of wall half buried. My foot caught on a jagged piece, ribs flaring sharp, and I stumbled forward. Her hand shot out, gripping my waist, taut and unyielding through my jacket. Fingers dug in just enough to steady, calluses pressing against the fabric over my bandage. The contact burned steady, her body heat cutting the chill. "Careful," she murmured, close enough that her breath brushed my ear. I righted myself, but she didn't release right away, her hold lingering as we navigated the next stretch. The ruins loomed, wind whipping dust into our faces, and every step pulled us nearer, her arm brushing mine when the path narrowed. We reached the central plaza, or what was left, a cratered expanse where the market had stood. "This can't be rebuilt like before," I said, kneeling to sift through pulverized brick. "The soil's unstable now, laced with unexploded ordnance. Your unit's precision strike? It scattered everything." Conflict rose then, words sharpening. She crouched beside me, uniform mud-streaked. "We had intel on hostiles embedded here. The call was necessary." I stood, facing her. "Necessary for what? Erasing homes to hit shadows? Feasibility's shot, costs triple, timeline doubles. Lives don't factor in your tactics." Her jaw clenched, eyes narrowing against the gusts. "I know the math, but holding back cost more in the long run." The argument hung, voices rising over the wind, until she looked away, toward the river. "It was a tactical error," she admitted, quiet. "The coordinates were off by 50 meters. I signed it." Clouds gathered again, dark and swift. Rain starting as a drizzle that thickened fast. We scrambled for cover under a half-standing arch, but it offered little. Water soaked through, plastering my shirt to skin, the bandage darkening. She stepped in front, shrugging off her jacket to shield me, bodies pressed close in the downpour. Her frame blocked the worst, chest to my back, arms extended like a barrier. Rain traced cold paths down my neck, but her warmth pressed insistent, breaths ragged against the storm. The world blurred to whetstone in her nearness, the scent of rain mixing with her, earth and faint soap. I felt it then, under the shield of her body, a tremble running through her, not from the cold soaking us both. Her grip on the jacket tightened, knuckles white, and in the flash of lightning I saw her face, eyes distant, jaw locked against something deeper. The blast's echo, I realized, the memory of fire and screams she'd ordered into being. She wasn't shaking from weather. It was the weight of it all, cracking through her control. The rain eased, but we stayed like that a moment longer, her tremble fading into steady resolve. Back at base, the tent lights glowed dim as dusk fell. She peeled off the wet jacket, hanging it by the flap, then turned to me, voice low and direct. "Show me where it hurts." Her eyes held mine, intense, demanding the truth she'd glimpsed in the ruins. I hesitated, hand at my side, the soaked bandage a cold weight. The air between us thickened again, waiting. The words hung there, simple and raw. "Show me where it hurts." Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes burned intense, pulling at something deep. The tent flap rattled in the evening wind, carrying the damp chill inside. I stood frozen, water dripping from my hair onto the packed dirt floor. My shirt clung cold to my skin, the bandage beneath it heavy and sodden. Part of me wanted to turn away, to guard the scar like I guarded the blueprints. But her gaze held me, unflinching, waiting. I lifted my shirt slowly, the fabric peeling away with a wet sound. The wound lay exposed under the lantern light, red and inflamed, stitches pulling tight across my ribs. Shrapnel's mark, jagged and fresh, a reminder of the blast that had stolen everything. She stepped closer, boots soft on the ground, her breath visible in the cooling air. Her fingers hovered first, then touched the edge, clinical and precise, like checking a rifle's sight. The pressure was light, testing the swelling, but as she traced the line, it shifted. Her calluses dragged slow over the heated skin, lingering at the deepest cut, thumb pressing just enough to send a spark through me.
"This is what I did," she said, voice low,
her finger following the scar's curve. The touch stayed there, warm against the chill, not pulling back. "Tell me it doesn't define you." The words pressed like her hand, demanding honesty. I swallowed, the air thick with the scent of rain and her, earth and faint metal from the field. My body betrayed me then, warmth spreading from the contact, coiling low despite the ache. Was this command or something else? Her intent blurred in the dim light, her face close, jaw set, but eyes searching mine. I questioned it silently. Did she seek absolution, or was the pull mutual, cracking her control? She didn't move her hand right away. Instead, she held it there, palm flat against my side, the heat seeping deeper. The tent felt smaller, the lantern's hum the only sound besides our breaths, sinking uneven. "It defines the pain," I said finally, voice rough. "But not me. Not entirely." Her gaze dropped to the scar, then back up, something softening in the lines of her face. She traced it once more, deliberate, the touch suggestive now, fingers mapping the damage like she mapped terrain. Warmth built under her palm, my pulse thudding against it, and I gripped the table edge to steady. Then she pulled back, but not far. Rolling up her own sleeve higher, she exposed more of her arm, the scar twisting further, disappearing under fabric toward her shoulder. "This op," she said, voice dropping. I was point on the advance. The blast caught us mid-crossing. Lost my second in command. Her body shielded mine. Her hand clutched mine suddenly, rough grip tight, knuckles white. The revelation came quiet, her eyes distant, reliving the dirt and screams. I gave the order knowing the risks. Carried her back myself, but it was too late. That weight, it stays. Her fingers squeezed, the shared scars linking us, vulnerability slipping through her armor. I felt it then, the battlefield trauma she buried, her hand trembling just once in mine. We stood like that, connected, the lantern flickering shadows across her face. The air thickened further, boundaries softening in the silence. Her thumb brushed my knuckles, accidental or not, sending another spark. I didn't pull away, the warmth lingering, questions swirling. Was this repair, or the start of something we couldn't command? A radio crackled outside, sharp and urgent, breaking the moment. She released my hand, stepping to the flap, but the orders pulled us both in. "Joint recon at first light," the voice said through static. "Hostile movement near the perimeter. You two lead." She nodded to the comms, then turned back, eyes meeting mine again. The assignment blurred lines further. Us, side by side in the field, the tension unresolved. Dawn would force us closer, the night's charge carrying forward. Dawn broke gray and heavy, the bass stirring with the low rumble of engines. We geared up in silence, her movements efficient, snapping straps on vests while I checked my pack. Compass, sketches, a sidearm I'd barely trained with. The recon orders weighed on us, the night's touch still echoing in the space between. "Stay close," she said, handing me a radio, her fingers brushing mine. Brief, but enough to spark memory. We loaded into the Jeep, her driving, the path rutted and slick from last night's rain. The perimeter loomed ahead, chain link scarred by blasts, the city ruins fading into scrubland beyond. We dismounted at the edge, boots sinking into soft earth. Hostile movement, Intel had said, but it felt off, too quiet, the wind carrying only distant bird calls. We moved side by side, her leading, scanning with practice sweeps. Tension coiled in every step, our shoulders nearly touching when the brush thickened. I pointed to fresh tracks in the mud, tire marks veering toward the rebuild site. "Sabotage," I whispered, heart thudding. She nodded, eyes sharp, and we crouched low, following the trail to a cluster of boulders overlooking the foundations I'd marked for new walls. The foxhole was tight, a shallow dip carved by erosion, barely room for two. We slid in, backs to damp rock, her body pressed along my side to fit. The air grew close, her uniform rough against my arm, heat building from the proximity. "Plans," she murmured, voice low in my ear, breath warm on my neck as she unfolded a small map between us. Her words came hushed, outlining flanks and signals, but the nearness pulled, her shoulder solid, the faint scent of her skin cutting through the dirt. I leaned in to trace a route, my cheek inches from hers, pulse sinking to the shared rhythm. The world narrowed to that space, whispers laced with urgency, her exhale stirring the hairs at my nape. We spotted them then, shadows rigging charges at the site, wires snaking toward the concrete pores. Adrenaline surged, sharp and electric. She signaled and we crept forward, silent as ghosts. I covered her flank, heart pounding as she disarmed the first device. Fingers steady on the cutters, snipping with a click that echoed too loud. The second was mine, hands shaking but guided by her nod. We worked in tandem, breaths held, until the last wire fell. The threat neutralized, we hauled the gear back, the rush leaving us breathless, bodies humming with the unspoken pull. Her hand gripped my elbow once, steadying, the contact lingering like a promise in the dust. Back at the Jeep, the high faded into quiet. She drove slower now, knuckles white on the wheel. "The city," she said finally, voice rough over the engine. I gave the order that gutted it. Family's gone, home's dust. Guilt like shrapnel. Can't cut it out. The confession hung, raw under the sun climbing higher. I met her eyes at a stop, seeing the fracture. "You carry it," I said, hand on her arm, warm through the sleeve. "But rebuilding starts with owning it. I see that in you, not the major, but the woman who trembles in the rain." Absolution slipped out. Quiet. Her gaze softening as she nodded, the weight shifting just a fraction. The unit waited at base, eyes on us as we unloaded. Too close, too synced in our steps. Whispers started immediate, heads turning in the mess tent that night. "What's with the major and the architect?" one murmured, loud enough. Rumors coiled like wire, questions in every glance. She ignored them, but I felt the shift, the base's gaze pressing. Debrief dragged in the command tent, map spread again, her voice steady on the report. But as the others filed out, she turned to me, eyes intense. "You're detaching," she said, stepping near, the air thickening. "After today, after everything. Why hold back?" Her challenge landed soft but firm, pulling at my resolve, the space between us alive with what we'd skirted. The supply run started routine, convoy rumbling out under a flat sky, crates loaded with rebar and cement for the first foundations. I rode in the back, sketches tucked in my vest, the Jeep bouncing over ruts that jarred my side. She drove point, her silhouette rigid against the dust cloud, rifle across her lap. The perimeter road twisted through scrub, wind whipping grit into my eyes. Halfway to the depot, the wound flared, sharp twist in my ribs, like the shrapnel shifting under skin. I gripped the side, breath catching, but waved off the driver when he glanced back. No weakness now, not with her leading. It hit full at the drop point, unloading crates in the heat. I bent for a bag of nails, pain lancing hot, vision blurring white. The world tilted, knees buckling into the dirt. Shouts rose, but she was there first, dropping her load to kneel, hands on my shoulders. "Breathe," she said, voice cutting through the haze, her palm flat on my back. The unit circled, but she waved them off, hoisting me up with a grunt, arms under my knees and back, my weight settling against her chest. Bodies aligned close, her heartbeat thudding steady through her vest, my head against her shoulder as she carried me to the Jeep. Strain etched her face, muscles taut under the load, but she didn't falter, steps measured over the uneven ground. The scent of her, sweat and canvas, filled my lungs, the carry intimate in its necessity, her grip firm around me. Back at base, she bypassed the med tent, taking me straight to quarters, the door flap closing behind us. Dim light filtered through canvas, lanterns unlit, shadows pooling on the cot. She eased me down, but the pain surged again, hand pressing my side. "Hold still," she said, intensity sharpening her tone as she knelt beside me, pinning my arm gently to treat. Her free hand worked the bandage loose, fingers probing the inflamed edges, exploring the hurt with careful pressure. Breaths mingled close, hers quick against my neck, the air thick in the low space. "You can't fix everything alone," she murmured, voice low and rough, eyes locking on mine as she cleaned the wound, cloth damp and steady. The words landed heavy, aimed at more than the injury, her touch lingering on the scar, warmth spreading despite the sting. I met her gaze, the dimness softening her edges, and the truth slipped out. It's not just the pain. You, being this close, it pulls at me. The attraction, it's there, undeniable. My voice broke quiet, admission hanging in the charged air. Her hands stilled on my skin, eyes widening a fraction. Then she pulled back, sharp, standing to pace the small space. "Command code," she said, clipped, turning away. "Fraternization risks the unit, the mission. We can't." The pullback stung worse than the wound, her walls slamming up, but the flicker in her eyes betrayed the crack. Word spread fast, the run's delay fueling questions. By evening, superiors called her in, Colonel's voice carrying from the command tent, sharp on our collaboration. "Too close, Major. The architect's input's vital, but rumors undermine chain. Pull back or reassign." Pressure mounted, her reports scrutinized, my sketches second-guessed in briefings. The base felt tighter, eyes following us, the stakes rising with every sidelong glance. Night deepened, generators humming low outside. I lay on the cot, side bandaged fresh. The ache dulled, but the day's weight lingering. Footsteps approached, soft on gravel, then the flat parted. She slipped in, alone, lantern light catching her face, tired lines, resolve fraying. She didn't speak at first, just sat on the crate edge, close enough for her knee to brush the cot. The silence stretched, walls cracking further in the quiet, her hand hovering near mine before settling on the blanket, inches away. The air shifted again, pulling us toward the unspoken. The ambush came at midday, during the rebuild survey. We pushed out early, her leading the small team through the scarred outskirts, my sketches marking safe zones for the next phase. The air hung still, heavy with the scent of dry earth and distant smoke. I walked beside her, compass in hand, pointing to a cleared stretch for the new water lines. "Here," I said, kneeling to test the soil. She nodded, scanning the ridge above, rifle loose but ready. The unit fanned out, boots crunching gravel. But something felt off. The birds silent, the wind too calm. It hit, fast. Shots cracked from the rocks, sharp and close, pinging off debris. "Down," she barked, shoving me behind a crumbled wall, her body covering mine for the split second it took to return fire. Chaos erupted. Bullets whined, dust kicking up like ghosts. We fought back to back, her shoulder pressed to mine, movements synced without words. I fired the sidearm, hands steady from her training the night before, covering her flank as she picked off the first shadow. Trust forged there, in the dirt and echoes, her commands low in my ear. "Left, now." Sweat stung my eyes, ribs throbbing with each recoil, but her presence anchored, solid against the fear. One grazed her arm, blood blooming dark on her sleeve. She didn't falter, just grunted and kept shooting, until the gunfire stuttered silent. The attackers scattered, but not before we spotted the insignia. Ours. Twisted. Betrayal, internal. Aimed at the rebuild to stall it all. We pursued short, her wound slowing us, but the unit closed in, hauling 2 prisoners back. Adrenaline thrummed, breaths ragged as we regrouped, her hand on my shoulder, brief, grounding. Back at the site, the medkit spilled open on a crate. I sat her down first, but she waved it off, eyes on my side where the old wound had reopened in the scramble, blood seeping through the bandage. "Your turn," she said, voice rough, kneeling to peel the shirt up. Her fingers worked gentle now, cleaning the fresh tear with steady pressure, cloth damp against skin. The touch turned tender, tracing the edges where pain met heat, her palm lingering flat to staunch the flow. Charged, the air between us, her breath close on my collarbone, eyes lifting to meet mine, dark, unguarded. Warmth spread from her hand, coiling slow, my pulse under her fingers. "I've destroyed enough," she whispered then, voice breaking quiet as she tied the dressing, her forehead nearly touching my shoulder. Don't let me destroy this. The words landed raw, confession slipping through, her hand clutching the fabric at my waist. I covered it with mine, feeling the tremble, the weight of orders and losses she'd carried alone. You won't, I said. Simple, the bond deepening in that hush, her gaze holding like a vow. We dragged the prisoners to base, their confessions spilling fast under questioning. Rogue elements in the supply chain, sabotaging to prolong the war. She laid it out in the briefing, voice steady, exposing the rot. The unit rallied behind us, nods and murmurs shifting to resolve, her leadership solidifying in the truth. No more whispers. They saw the trust we'd built, the way we stood synced. The victory briefing wrapped late, maps rolled away, the tent emptying to night sounds. She caught my arm as I turned, pulling me aside into the shadows by the flap. We need to talk, she said, low, her fingers lingering on my skin, the private reckoning waiting in the dark. The days after the ambush settled into a fragile rhythm, the base buzzing with purpose as we oversaw the first rebuild phase. Cranes groaned overhead, lifting rebar into place for the water lines we'd surveyed, concrete mixing in thick pores that hardened under the sun. She directed the crews with quiet authority, her arm bandaged but steady, while I sketched adjustments on site, erasing sabotage scars with new lines. Collaboration hummed electric between us, her nods syncing to my measurements, our steps falling together over the fresh dirt. The air carried the sharp tang of wet cement and her presence, constant, pulling like gravity. Every shared glance carried the night's confession, her whisper echoing in the spaces we navigated. In the planning tent that afternoon, maps unrolled across the scarred table, we bent close over the next foundation grid. Her boot shifted under the wood, brushing my ankle. Deliberate or not, the contact sent a warm jolt up my leg, lingering as she leaned in to point at a support beam. Here, she said, voice low, her finger tracing the line inches from mine. The brush repeated, slow pressure against my calf, heat building through denim. I didn't move, pulse quickening, the tense canvas walls muffling the outside clamor. Our eyes met over the paper, hers dark and intent, the unspoken charge thickening the air like dust before rain. Talk turned deeper as shadows lengthened, the lantern flickering to life. Beyond this, she said, rolling the map but not pulling her foot away. What then? War ends, city stands. What's left for someone like me? Her words hung, probing a future she'd never voiced, her gaze fixed on the flames' dance. I set my pencil down, the wood cool under my palm. You mean the armor? The orders that keep everything locked? She nodded, jaw tightening, but her boot pressed firmer, a silent anchor. It saved lives out there. But it costs, too. Keeps you from this. I gestured between us, the warmth spreading. Let it crack. See what builds after. She held my stare, vulnerability flickering, the dialogue peeling layers she'd guarded for years. Then the complication landed, sharp as incoming fire. A dispatch from command, my transfer papers sliding across the table the next morning. Reassigned to Central Ops, it read, pulling me from the site, from her. The words hit like gravel under boots, the tent suddenly too small. She crumpled the sheet, eyes flashing. No, your work's here. The rebuild needs you. She stormed to the radio, voice clipped as she argued with superiors, demanding extensions, citing the sabotage threat. She's integral, she insisted, pacing, her free hand clenching. I watched, chest tight, the fight stirring something deep. Her battling not just for expertise, but for us. Lines blurring in her resolve. The unit confronted it head-on that evening, gathered in the mess tent over rations, eyes shifting between us. One sergeant leaned in, voice gruff but low. Saw you two in the field, back to back, like one unit. Rumors aside, it works. Keeps us steady. Murmurs rippled, nods from the others. No judgment, just quiet support, faces etched with the war's wear. She stood, silent at first, then met their gazes. It does. The acknowledgement settled, the groups backing a shield against the transfer's pull. Our connection no longer whispered, but seen, valued in the grit. Night fell heavy, the decision deadline looming at dawn. She walked me to quarters, steps slow over the cooling gravel, her shoulder brushing mine with each stride. The flap parted, lantern light spilling soft inside, and tension peaked in the close space. The cot, the table, air thick with what hung unsaid. She stopped at the threshold, hand on the canvas, eyes searching mine. "Stay," she said, voice rough, the word carrying beyond assignment. The door closed behind us, the final hours stretching, pulling us into the quiet unraveling. The lantern's glow cast long shadows across the canvas walls, the air still thick from the day's heat. She stood there, hand lingering on the flap, her eyes holding mine with that unflinching intensity. "Stay," she repeated, the word rougher now, stepping inside fully, the door falling shut behind her. The space closed in, cot and table the only anchors in the dim. I sat on the edge, ribs a dull throb, watching her pace once, then stop close, too close, her knee brushing the blanket again. Not just for the rebuild, as partner, with me. The demand landed quiet but firm, her voice cracking the silence like gravel under boot. I weighed it then, the risk sharp in my chest, the transfer looming, the war's pull, her command that could shatter us both. Staying meant crossing lines, blurring orders into something personal, dangerous in this world of dust and directives. She knelt slowly, level with me, her hand finding my knee through the fabric, warm and steady. The touch pulled, suggestive in its restraint, fingers pressing just enough to ground. I covered it with mine, feeling the calluses, the faint tremble beneath. Shadows played across her face, softening the angles, and she leaned in, our breaths mingling in the narrow space. Her free arm wrapped around my waist, drawing me closer, bodies aligning in the hush, chest to chest, the heat of her seeping through damp shirts. The embrace charged the air, her lips brushing my temple, restrained but insistent, a spark coiling low without crossing further. I leaned into it, hand sliding to her neck, thumb tracing the pulse there, quick and alive. The world narrowed to that hold, her scent of earth and faint sweat filling my lungs, the unspoken affirmation building in the press of skin. We pulled back just enough to see each other, foreheads touching, breaths ragged. "I feel it too," I said, voice low, affirming the pole we'd skirted for weeks. "This, us, it's real." Her eyes searched mine, vulnerability raw in the lantern light. "Then I'll leave it, the military, for us. Can't command what I need most." The vow came steady, her hand squeezing my knee, the weight of ranks shed like old gear. I nodded, the decision settling. Risks accepted in that shared gaze. The moment turned speechless then, her rolling up her sleeve fully, exposing the scar's full twist, jagged across her arm, a battlefield map. "Redesign it," she whispered, handing me a pencil from the table, her skin pale under my fingers. I traced slow, sketching over the mark, a rising arch, beams interlocking like rebuilt foundations, symbolizing repair. The lines curved gentle, my touch light on her arm, graphite smudging warm against the old wound. She watched, breath held, the redesign sealing something deeper, no words, just the quiet act binding scars to futures. Promises exchanged in the hush after, her hand over mine on the paper. "We'll build beyond this," she said, voice soft. "A life, not just walls." I met her eyes, glimpsing it. Homes rising, hands entwined in peace, the war fading to memory. Dawn crept in then, gray light filtering through seams, pulling us from the night. We rose together, facing the world, side by side. The choice, forged in touch and trust. Hand in hand amid the rising structures, scars bared and healed in the morning light, we stepped forward, rebuilt, unbroken. If this quiet truth of mending through touch resonates, share your story below. Subscribe for more tales of finding home in the unexpected.